In California, you're supposed to stop for a pedestrian at a crosswalk. And in a recent study, some 90% of drivers did. Except for those driving luxury cars, like this BMW. They were almost as likely to run the intersection as wait for the person to cross the street.
Here I go again. What's my weakness? Podcasting. Podcasting's my weakness. And to keep me strong and healthy and in check, got the man on mic number 2, Nelson, the cat addict, Beaulieu.
What's going on, bud?
We all put him on the couch, and you are listening to our 67th, 68th episode, something like that. Yeah, it's...
See, a stronger podcaster would know what episode they were on.
Well, look,
this is 67.
Occasionally, we bank episodes, release them later, and create the illusion that they're coming out live, when in fact, ladies and gentlemen, they're not. However, we do have a new offer. For $99 a year, you can get your ears on new episodes within 6 hours of the final edit. That is a full day to a week early. So please look in the description, follow the link. I'm just kidding. I told you we're not going to ask for money yet.
$99 to get an episode.
Speaking of power, today.
What would the difference be? How does that help anybody?
Today we're talking about power. The ability, Nelson, for me to influence you in a positive, I guess, or negative direction.
Yeah, I guess that would be the ability for anybody to influence anybody else, right? Anybody can have power. And I think at different points in our lives, in different roles in our lives, we all will have some power or be powerless.
And we've heard all the quips, right? We've heard things like, it's lonely at the top.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown.
We've heard that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yep.
We've heard of different philosophies and social movements decrying that we need to get rid of all power structure, all hierarchies, right?
Yep.
But those are testable hypotheses, I believe. And I think we can look back historically as well as philosophically and certainly psychologically to determine the extent to which those quips may or may not be completely true. I suspect, before we get into this episode, that there's going to be more nuance and more context that needs to be explored.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this topic really correlates and continues on with something we've kind of been exploring leading up to the presidential election here in November, which is, I guess in a broad context, leadership and what it really is, what it looks like, and, how democracy sees leadership and how it values leadership and the role that leadership plays in a democracy.
Yeah. Power to the people. Hey,
that's right. We're sovereign, baby.
This time on Put 'em on the Couch, we're talking about power. Who's got it, who wants it, and what they can do to keep it. We'll be right back.
Drivers of those BMWs, those Porsches, those Mercedes were anywhere from 3 to 4 times more likely to break the law than drivers of less expensive, low-status cars.
In a country more and more polarized by inequality, UCal Berkeley's Paul Piff led a series of startling studies showing an apparent link between wealth and, unseemly behavior.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to Put 'em on the Couch, the podcast that tries to keep your attention for at least an hour, sometimes an hour and 15. Today, we're talking about power. We're going to look at it through the lens of history, possibly philosophy, and certainly some psychology. Nelson, I don't know about you, but in my field of psychology, we like to start with a definition before we actually get moving into any conversation about a concept. And today, no different. Power. Bertrand Russell said power is the basic medium of social life, suggesting that, you can't go anywhere, you can't do anything without thinking about, without assuming some level of power. The sociologist Stephen Lukes argues that power is your capacity to influence others, To me, that sounds about right. What do you think?
Yeah, I like that definition. I like the second one better than the first one. That's for sure. I think
a little more
that
specific.
The power to influence and move other people. That's real power, right? And so that can come in many forms, right? I mean, you can be physically powerful. You could be monetarily powerful. Spiritually powerful, absolutely. So you think about, like, just priests, politicians, and wrestlers or boxers, right?
Yeah.
All of them are people I think we'd call powerful people.
But they might have different
types of
influence.
Can you think of any other different types of power? Is a teacher powerful?
Well, hey, look, I think even the impoverished to some extent, the starving artist could be powerful, I guess. They could express themselves in a way that moves you. Sylvia Plath, super depressed. Van Gogh probably had some problems, to say the least, but was able to move people.
Do you think you're powerful in your role as an educator?
I would like to think I'm somewhat powerful in my role as an educator,
people, right?
I can and do influence people, and but I think there are other things that, other contexts where I'm even more powerful. I'd say as a father, I'm probably more powerful. As a neighbor, particularly when I've got the egg and people are looking for one egg, they don't want to go to the grocery store.
What is this?
But I will say, Nelson, what I like,
fairy tale?
What I like about that definition, it also gets you to think about what is slightly different from power, right? Like, if you don't think about it too carefully, you might suspect that power is about status or dominance or strength or having a lot of money. But I think power is different from status, right? Because status is like the respect and regard you get for who you are, right? And you can have a lot of regard, but maybe not have a lot of power, or vice versa. Maybe you don't have as much regard, but you do have some power, wealth and class.
Well, let's do this.
As well as dominance.
Name a couple powerful people, and we'll put that to the test, because I don't know.
Oh, in terms of like having...
Yeah, just name some people that you think are powerful.
Powerful, yeah. So I think Dalai Lama's powerful.
Okay. But that's a pretty high status, right? To be born the Dalai Lama.
Yeah, not bad. Abraham Lincoln, I think, was powerful.
Okay, President of the United States.
And again, I think maybe someone with extremely rare disease as a child might be powerful, and that they can get a lot of people to sort of think about them, pray for them.
Yeah, but that's not what you think of when you think of power.
Agree.
We think of the status.
I agree, but my point is, I don't think you necessarily have to have status to be powerful.
No,
right?
I don't think so.
I think you could possibly gain status.
I think those dogs on the commercial with Sarah McLachlan and the little puppies are shaking.
Oh, good
those
point.
are powerful animals, right?
And likewise,
images can be powerful.
And you would agree you don't have to be dominant to have power, right? You don't have to have those strategies to coerce and manipulate people.
No, I don't think so. Although maybe really, really powerful people like Abraham Lincoln are able to coerce and manipulate without even
lifting a finger,
without even making you realize they're doing it.
Right. So again, power, ladies and gentlemen, in this way, we're talking about power as an ability to kind of influence others or others' minds or others' states, conditions, with something that you have, whether that something you have is physical strength, intellectual strength, the strength to form alliances, coalitions. David Winter is a researcher who says that there are differences, Nelson, in terms of who seeks or wants power. He argues that extroverts might want it a little bit more than introverts, although there's some counter evidence in some circles that suggests both want it, but that extroverts might want it a little more, that men might want it a little bit more than women. I think what happens is you have to make sure you understand that there's at least two models of power. One is probably the old, more dominant version or model, the Machiavellian model. You've heard of this one, right?
Yeah, sure.
This idea that power must be taken, power must be gained, even if you have to lie or steal or cheat or make fake promises or feign religion.
Yeah, I think you and I have talked about it. I don't know if I agree with your take on Machiavelli.
Well, no, I'm just saying
because I think that's an ends justifies the means argument, and I don't think that's what he was saying.
I don't know what he was saying, since he was a satirist, a playwright, a writer. I mean, I do know that he was writing in the 15th, 16th century. I know that it was a particularly violent time he was writing in. It was a time where there was a lot of corruption. There weren't many angels around during that time,
and in a world of devils, do you want one angel leading you? Because I don't think that's going to be very effective.
So he was suggesting, hey, rule with fear over love. But again, we don't know if he was being tongue-in-cheek about it or if he was saying, look, this is just about survival. But I guess my point is, whether he was being sincere, literal or not, there has to be some other alternative. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
There has to be some
Absolutely.
other alternative. And lately, researchers have been looking. Dacher Keltner at Berkeley, he's been studying human goodness, kindness, this idea of human flourishing for the past 25 years. And he has relatively recently written a book called The Power Paradox. And in his book, he argues that, in his laboratory studies over the past 25 years, people can actually gain power. They can gain it through cooperation, collaboration, empathy, good storytelling, good listening skills, that actually it's better to gain your power in that way because your power is more authentic. It's sustained a little bit better. You keep it a little bit longer. However, the downside, of course, is that even if you get it through coercive and violent means, really hard to keep power because there's this human tendency that once you get to the top, that there's something within human nature that says, hey, I want to take a little bit more around the edges than is mine. I want to maybe cheat a little bit.
Another experiment tested honesty in reporting dice scores when cash was on the line.
People all the way at the top who made $150,000, $200,000 a year were actually cheating 4 times as much as someone all the way at the bottom who made under $15,000 a year just to win credits for a $50 cash prize.
Right. In other words,
do you think that's universal?
Well,
Or do you think power produces it?
Well, what Keltner believes is that, like when you get to the top, you probably aren't corrupted because you're powerful. You're probably just disinhibited, like the chains are off, so to speak. So if you're already a bad person and you get to the top through whatever means, you're just going to have the tendency to be even worse. However, he argues, Serena Chin, also at Berkeley, her evidence shows that if you are good, like Dalai Lama good or Martin Luther King Jr. good, and you make it to the top, their laboratory studies have shown that it actually disinhibits you to do more good. I think about this as sort of, can goodness, right?
I don't know about that.
Can goodness be spread? Can power make somebody even better? Right? With a little bit of power, does it disinhibit you to spread even more goodness, even more egalitarianism?
Well, but good how? Because I think
good in terms of cooperation, good in terms of empathy,
in their personal
sharing
lives,
resources.
In his personal life, certainly, Dr. King. There's a lot of questions about his personal life that are still being studied and explored. Mahatma Gandhi, I think, was good, but his personal life was absolutely horrific. So,
well, I don't know about horrific. It's not like
horrific.
Donald Trump horrific. It's not like Joseph Stalin or Pol Pot horrific. I think we would both agree here that power, goodness, corruption can be looked at dimensionally, right? It's not a either or kind of thing. It's some of us are worse than others, objectively worse than others.
Yeah. See, I'm wondering if the disinhibitions come from just isolation and insulation. Once you're at the
lonely
top,
at the top,
yeah, you're insulated, and you don't really have a lot of checks on your authority, and people aren't going to stop you and say, hey, don't do this, don't do that, if you're at the very top. But I'm wondering if the actions they take are just because they're on their own and not necessarily free from consequence.
Well, that's it. I mean, it frees you up to express your human tendencies without any social constraint, right, Nelson? There's no maybe consequences for your behavior. In general, people maybe are a little more selfish, a little more narcissistic, a little more impulsive, a little less attentive to the needs of others once they get to the top. But I guess my point is, according to these laboratory studies by Keltner and Chen and others, if you're good already, however, it might just, again, give you the opportunity to be a little bit more good. But if you're bad already, it might just give you the sort of disinhibition you need to be even worse.
I'm just saying, that's a little simplistic.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's a little...
Well,
how are we studying that? How could we even begin to quantify that?
I'm glad you asked that.
Lincoln was good and did more good.
Keltner's student, Paul Piff, who studied under him at Berkeley, has a fascinating study or two that I'm reminded of. And actually, I paid homage to that study by putting the Monopoly board in our promo.
Mm-hmm.
What Paul Piff did, again, the understudy of Keltner, the guy who wrote the Paradox, the Power of Paradox, did was he brought students into the laboratory. He told them they were going to be just playing a game of Monopoly. The game starts, and one person rolls one die. The other person gets to roll two during their turn.
Results consistent across 30 studies he's run on thousands of people all over the United States. So what is it about wealth that might make people behave differently?
What are we doing here?
We're playing a game of Monopoly that's rigged.
This game is typical of another kind of experiment Piff likes to run. Instead of studying actual rich people, Piff gets subjects to feel rich in the lab. The designated Monopoly money bags starts with a few legs up. $2,000 versus the poor man's $1,000. An upscale playing piece, the rolls, versus an old shoe. The right to toss 2 dice instead of just 1.
2, I've got snake eyes, I'm on a...
Meaning I assign the role of rich person, get an extra turn.
but I roll again because I've got...
Yep, because you rolled doubles.
6, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's Tennessee Avenue, and of course I'll buy that.
Meanwhile, poor Paul Piff.
I only get to roll 1 die, and as it says here, when I pass go, I collect a lower salary. I collect $100.
Here's your 1 die.
Great, thanks so much.
Yeah, sure.
I can't roll doubles. I don't get opportunities to move very far along the board.
Piff has run this experiment with hundreds of people on the Berkeley campus. The rich players are determined randomly by coin toss, the game rigged so they cannot lose. And yet, says Piff, despite their presumably liberal bent going in,
When we asked them afterwards, how much do you feel like you deserved to win the game? The rich people felt entitled. They felt like they deserved to win the game. And that's a really incredible insight into what the mind does to make sense of advantage or disadvantage.
so even though a subject like myself is just play acting,
You consistently find that I begin to attribute success to myself, even though it's a coin flip that got me on this side of the board as opposed to that.
You, like a real rich person, start to attribute success to your own individual skills and talents, and you become less attuned to all of the other things that contributed to you being in the position that you're in.
What he found was the people with the 2 die, who clearly were given an advantage, talked louder, showboated a little bit more. They were literally banging their piece as they moved around the board and counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, louder than the other person. Their body posture showed more evidence of power, open arms, really wide open man spread. And there was also some hors d'oeuvres or some snacks in the middle of the table the entire time. And what Piff wanted to know was, would one or the other player take more of these snacks? So like pretzels in the middle of the board. And apparently the people who were moving around the board twice as fast ate more snacks as well, as if they felt empowered to. They felt like they deserved them. So that was one thing I wanted to share with you. Another thing I was wanting to share with you is this idea that, the powerful might be mean in other contexts. They might pay less attention to the needs of others. Piff had his graduate students go to a crosswalk, a busy crosswalk in California. And in California, I guess, like in most states, it's illegal to keep going if somebody's standing in the crosswalk, right? I know Massachusetts is pretty serious about protecting pedestrians or whatnot. But anyway, California, no different. You stand in the crosswalk, and cars supposed to stop. And what Piff and his students did was just observe who stopped versus who just kept going when they were standing in the crosswalk. And he found that people, on average, that were driving more expensive luxury cars, hence people that were ostensibly a little more powerful, status-filled, were less likely to stop. They would just speed right through the intersection. And people with more humble, lower-priced cars were way more likely to stop. So again, it suggests that maybe you're not necessarily born power hungry. You're not necessarily, it's not something within you that's making you a bad person or making you impulsive or making you not care about other people. Maybe it's literally being on that perch, having that power.
That's interesting. So, when you were talking, especially with the Monopoly example, it almost sounds like what you're saying is it's possible to be, if you are, because you mentioned just getting this extra die by advantage. So what happens when a person is born just by chance, like we all are, into advantage? And I was thinking about some of the kids I knew from school, some of the wealthy kids I knew who, to be honest with you, they were kind of dicks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they were kind of,
and they can be, right?
Yeah, right.
Because they've got a built-in safety net.
If you're born into privilege, I'm wondering if you might be predisposed to be a little mean, to be a little unfeeling, to be, and taking it back into history,
To be more of a bully.
Are you familiar with the 5 good emperors?
No.
So at the height of the imperial period in Rome, really in the 2nd century, with the 5 good emperors, the empire was not passed down from father to son. It wasn't passed down from father to son until you get to the last of the 5 good emperors, with Marcus Aurelius passing it to his son Commodus.
Okay.
But what the emperors were looking for was a relative who was kind, patient, wise, that had all the characteristics you might look for in a benevolent dictator or a benevolent ruler. And the empire really
Which sounds almost
flourished,
oxymoronic,
right?
doesn't it? Benevolent dictator,
No,
benevolent ruler.
sometimes you need one of those, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting, because when you get to dynastic rule in the imperial period or in any empire, you often see, certainly over time, but often very, very quickly, degradation. You see backsliding. Many of the emperors who had the empire handed to them were, kind of sadistic. You think, of course, of Nero. You think of Caligula, very young, entitled, right? They got that second die.
Yeah.
And of course, I want to be very careful and say that
They inherited that second die, didn't they?
In the case of Caligula, in the case of Nero, yes and no, not exactly. Neither. There's entirely possible that neither of them, in fact, might have been likely that neither of them would ever have been emperor. But they knew before they got the job that they were lined up.
Yeah, but they could see it, right? They could see that die, right?
They
like it's in the room when they're born.
It's in the room.
Right?
Yeah.
It might be on the top shelf, might be a little out of reach, but they can see it.
Yeah. So I'm wondering. I'm wondering to what extent then maybe power's just accidental. And is it more dangerous when it's accidental or birthed? Is it safer to achieve it?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because then you go down to like the Dalai Lama, and he's the Dalai Lama, right? He was born the Dalai Lama, and he was picked the Dalai Lama, and he seems like a nice guy.
Well, look, I think it's important for us to understand that power in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. Pursuing power, I don't think, is necessarily a bad thing. To the extent, to go back to Bertrand Russell's remarks, that it's the medium in which we all sort of live, kind of like the water in which all fish swim. It's just everywhere around us. From the moment, a woman is pregnant, the baby is trying to gain power, to get more of the nutrients inside itself versus leave them for mom. I'm a parent, you're a parent. There's always this little struggle about, of power between you and your kids. In romantic relationships, there's this struggle between who's going to do what, when, where, and how. There's struggles between friends and teammates, right? There's power dynamics all around us to the extent that we're social creatures. And I think this goes without saying. We are going to exercise, we're going to at times benefit from, and at other times sort of lose, in a sense, when someone else has more power. I think it's a good thing, though, in general. Power does give you some benefits, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Makes you feel good.
Absolutely.
Right? It probably lets you enjoy more resources, free time even. Yep. It gives you access to more people, different types of people. I think generally speaking, you have the chance to have more freedom and be more happy, connection with others. We're finding that power is associated with health. Those that have power, whether that was given to them or they took it, do live slightly longer.
So I would have to say that, now you'd have to separate that study.
Yeah.
because you'd have to look at power without money.
Well, yeah,
I don't
But
know
their
how much
children,
I buy
by
that.
the way, their children, it seems, live longer. The more powerful you are when you have children, the more likely they are to live longer. So I think we have to rethink these quips like it's lonely at the top. Sure, lonely at the top, but if you like living healthy, strong, robust, connected, more years on the earth, then who cares if it's lonely? Vice versa, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the powerless. We've talked about poverty on this show many, many times. Having less power, having no power, in the case of, my mom, my dad, my grandpa, they were born into poverty. I was born into poverty. Didn't have a lot of social clout or currency. Didn't have the means with which to rise or influence lots of people. I don't think there's any doubt that played a significant role in the majority of my closest living relatives not seeing their 60th birthday. We see this time and time again.
But
diseases of despair, we call them now. I just want to say that not having power makes it harder to stay alive. Not having the same access to power makes it harder to form coalitions, makes it harder to live a healthy life, to get your
Well, I
hands
also
on.
think it makes you susceptible to manipulation.
Absolutely.
Like I was
Conspiratorial thinking, negativity.
I was thinking about the. I was thinking about slavery in the American South.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the J6 Patriots Warriors.
I was thinking about slavery in the American South.
Talk about that a little bit now.
Yeah, sure. So one of the ways in which the planter class avoided, look, you had a lot of workers, okay?
Mm-hmm. Oh my God, did you? In Europe, you had 3/4 of the population were slaves at one point in Europe.
Well, no, I mean, you had a lot of poor, white, Southern workers.
Oh,
laborers,
non-slaves, but they're laborers,
non-slaves who were just eking out a living on a family farm. You were talking about your
indenture.
Your
What do they call
family
those
is
people?
Your
Sharecroppers,
sure,
to some
yeah,
extent.
Your family is likely a legacy of those families,
Absolutely,
right?
100%.
So slavery ends, and there's this hope for the New South during Reconstruction, right? And then there's this,
continuation in some ways,
racism where people are talking, look, yeah, your lot's rough, but man,
it could be so much worse.
You're not
At least
black.
you're better than
You're not these black
We've
people.
heard that before,
You're
right?
not
How do you make someone who's poor and disenfranchised feel a little bit better about themselves?
Point to what they're not.
Point out the person that has it a little bit worse.
Absolutely. And then you talk about that conspiratorial thinking. I think if you are powerless, if you feel like you are losing power, if I'm losing power, and you look throughout history, individuals who are losing power, they lash out, they become violent, they react in order to keep
100%
what they have.
And economists like Kahneman and Tversky, our last episode, ladies and gentlemen, about weird. I think I mentioned sort of gains versus losses, right? Losses loom larger than gains.
Sure.
Kahneman and others have found that if you're in a losing frame of mind, that biologically, evolutionarily, it just makes perfect sense that you throw caution to the wind and take more risk. To a group of people who either do or feel as if, who perceive to have nothing to gain, who have no chance, no hope, well, of course they're going to follow you. It's going to be easy to rouse those people. It's going to be easy to get people like that on your side. I think about Trump and how he rose to power. Look, he pushed the grievance card, you have to admit. He pushed the white nationalist card to some extent. He preyed on people's vulnerabilities. He preyed on the powerless, to use some of these great artist quips, like Chris Cornell from Soundgarden. I can't feed on the powerless while my cup's already overfilled. I think about Rage Against the Machine, talking about the powerless. Fight against the man, rage against the machine. Trump and any would-be proto-fascist or dictator or authoritarian will find it easier to rise to power if they feign that they're on someone's side, if they feign religion, if they feign they're going to help you. Maybe this is how and why strong men come to power so easily sometimes. But they do need to rally the troops, so to speak. They do need to get a lot of people on the side.
Well,
and I think, if you're already in a losing state of mind, right, through whatever, the loss of jobs, unemployment, the perception that other people who you've always thought had it worse than you are somehow having it better than you,
Yeah, I
Right?
think perception is important, not only when you talk about, powerlessness and being powerful, but in terms of being a powerful person, how did you come by that power? Because I do think it makes a difference if somebody perceives that they became powerful through their own will,
Yeah, they worked for it.
or if they were given power.
Oh yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
there's a radio duo, nationally syndicated, but I know they're popular in Alabama. And
Oh
they were-
yeah,
they were-
it's Jason and Nelson's Put 'Em on the Couch, isn't it?
well,
I think that's right. Yeah. I'm just kidding.
Lex and Terry. Shout out to Lex and
Oh,
Terry.
my
Good
gosh.
dudes. They
Sounds familiar, yeah.
They were talking. I think they're in Jacksonville too. They always, their whole thing was to just answer radio calls and give advice.
Okay.
They weren't qualified to do it, except
No,
it was
it
just
sounds
two bros.
again
right?
sounds exactly like us.
So we don't give advice. We just give information.
Yeah, okay.
There's a big difference.
Yeah.
But they always said, because people would call in with their relationship questions, and they always said that the power in any relationship belongs to he who cares the least.
Wow. Again, that sounds a little Machiavellian, right?
It's a little manipulative,
little
right?
1950s, yeah.
But playing off of that, right?
Mansploitative.
When you don't care, right? I mean, I don't mean don't care in that you're completely disinterested, that you're flattened, that you're depressed, but when you stop pursuing power, I mean, isn't really that the greatest power that you can possess?
Yeah.
When you just say, fine,
Yeah.
fine, right? Or, we've talked about this before, when you humble yourself.
Oh, yeah,
when you
yeah.
go on knee to your neighbor's house who might be kind of an ass, who
And-
doesn't
and
necessarily
ask
want to
for
give
help,
the
ask
eggs
for advice.
and say, can I have an egg?
Yeah, I really
Aren't
need your
you
help.
being manipulated?
Yeah, that's a
Isn't
good
that
point.
powerful to say, I need you to help me?
Yeah.
Can you teach me?
Again, I think that speaks to that second model, that sort of anti-Machiavellian model, that Oprah Winfrey model, right? Where you're trying to do good, or in some way you're trying to maybe coerce softly. Maybe that's soft power. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think that's a cornerstone of U.S. diplomacy, right? The power of our example, the power of kindness, the power of helping a friend. How powerful was that, right?
Yeah.
When the Taliban go into an area in Pakistan or Afghanistan,
They
after
give
an
something, I
earthquake,
bet, don't they?
first thing they do, you think they're going to preach right away?
Right. No, they're going to give something.
They're going to say, hey, you need a sandwich?
Yeah, they got to bait
You
you.
need medicine?
I don't know. Oh, that was the stereotype for drug dealers throughout my entire upbringing. My
Gangs,
parents,
too.
My parents were always concerned that they would, get to me because they would give me some freebie, a sample, so to speak. Right.
Yeah,
I remember being in the mall and I'd be walking around the food court. There'd be those people standing around with little toothpick-sized or little hors d'oeuvres with the toothpicks in them. You could grab something off the tray and just sample it, right?
Yeah.
You can sit there and sample as many times as you want. Costco still does it. Yeah. Drug dealers like, hey, taste this. Oh, you like it? Here, have another. And then, of course, when you're addicted, you come back and you're willing to pay for it. Yeah, I think the Medellin and drug cartels of Cartagena, Colombia, was Pablo Escobar. He was known for giving out dollars in the streets. Right?
Yeah.
He'd give people, children, money.
Well, that's why I don't even in countries that are almost without government. I think of course of the Sudan now or something.
Yeah.
Even countries like that, I don't really see a power vacuum. I see a structure vacuum. But power's like water; it's going to find every crack, right? So
Yeah.
I don't think we can live in a world without a power structure.
No, I don't think so.
Even if it's not defined,
And I
it's
also
there.
don't think that there's a way to be to rise and stay at the top using the staunch Machiavellian approach of ruling through fear completely and having the iron fist. Because again, even those hardened dictator types, the Pol Pots, the Pablo Escobars, when you think about the 1950s Mad Men style, Archie Bunker style, deep recesses of the manosphere power, even those people realize that to keep people into the fray of the folds, you got to, at the very least, feign cooperation, empathy. You got to feign that you're listening. You got to feign that you care.
Well, think
you
about
gotta
the
tell
robber
some
barons.
stories, right? I mean, Trump would never, ever, ever admit this, but he's never lived a tough day in his life. Come on. He's never really had to take a real risk. He's
Yeah,
always
but
had something to fall back on.
what about
but he's
the
gotta tell
Russian
his
hoax, the
people, but
witch
he's
hunt?
got to tell his people some of those things that make them believe that he's sort of like us, right? He's got to make it sound like he's an ordinary everyman, even though we know that story's not completely true. So you got to share. You've got to be vulnerable.
Well, think about the robber barons. You know, there's a great documentary, if our listeners haven't seen it, on Amazon Prime, I believe. It's The Men Who Built America.
Oh, love that.
Yeah,
love that
it's
series.
really, really good because it actually it's as psychological as it is historical,
Yeah.
right? Gets into the mind of these captains of industry.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people are ruthless. They are cruel to their workers, cruel beyond description, disinterested in their well-being. And yet, on the other side of that, you know, there's a lot of admiration for them, even during the Gilded Age when they, you know, helped build the country, because they were philanthropists. You know, they gave back to their communities. They built incredible halls and
That sounds like Bezos and Gates and all the other billionaires.
Sure. Is that any different? You know, Zuckerberg too, right? These people have pledged to give 50% of their wealth away because nobody should ever have that wealth. I'd argue nobody should ever have 50% of it either. And it seems impossible that they could actually give away that much. That's how much they have. It's difficult to give away. So,
Dude, I've heard many times over that the richest person in every country on this earth, all like 200 countries plus on this earth, could give away half of their wealth and solve the problem of poverty overnight in that respective country. Yet we've got billionaires that would rather get in a giant phallic-looking rocket and shoot themselves to the moon, so as to symbolize just how much more powerful
Freudian.
and above.
You're the only person. You guys are the only people who see penises in that rocket.
Well,
that
it doesn't matter. It just
Freudian.
says I'm bigger, stronger, more powerful. Like, you know, when
There
the
you
boss
go.
sits in a
There
chair
you
that's
go.
taller than yours, the desk is bigger than yours. They spread their body out larger than yours.
Do they do that? Is that a
Gosh, yes. The whole man spreading. Do men, especially with power, even women in power, do that? Yeah, they want to sit above you. I had a boss one time. If he listens, he probably remembers. We were having a little bit of a powwow in the office, and he was literally positioning himself as we were kind of arguing, raising his voice and literally raising his body, standing closer to me, sitting, and he was almost at one point standing on his desk trying to be taller than me.
Whoever that person is, respect.
There was a literal example, not literal, but there was also a kind of a satirical example of this in a old show that David Spade played in. It was about, fashion industry models. He was working in this agency, and he had a chair that would like go up and down. And you know David Spade's a little guy. And his role, I don't think, was that status-filled, but he would be talking with people. And when he felt a little insecure when he was talking with them, or when he wanted to assert his status, what little bit he had, he would hit the button and it would raise him really high in the air, like satirically high in the air. I can't remember the show's name, but again, it was really funny.
All right, let's do this. We talked a little bit about, some definitions about, what is powerful, what's not.
Yeah.
Let's put power into 3 classic buckets when we get back. Let's do physical. Let's do monetary, and let's do political power.
Yeah. And let's talk about whether or not...
how we achieve these.
And whether or not we can keep the power when we get it, and what, if anything, we can do to keep it in check.
Let's do it.
All right.
Somewhat surprising, says Keltner, is that even the haves suffer.
One of the things that Wealth and Money does is it comes with a set of values and if you want, a deeper ideology, and one of them is generosity is for suckers. Right, and it's greed is good. But it turns out there are a lot of new data that show if you're generous and charitable and altruistic, you'll live longer, you'll feel more fulfilled, you'll feel more expressive of who you are as a person, you probably will feel more control and freedom in your life.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're talking about power. I was just mentioning on the other side David Spade and his role in this advertising or modeling agency. I think it was called Just Shoot Me, by the way.
Yeah,
it just kind of came to me.
That's
He had
right.
that chair that would go abnormally high in the air to sort of give himself the impression of being at least symbolically stronger or bigger than.
Well, let's talk
we're
about
talking about power.
So of those 3,
spirituality,
physical power,
and
physical, monetary, and political.
Okay.
Which would you
prefer?
Which would you prefer? I mean, you probably got physical power already.
Nah,
You're a
I wouldn't
big
want.
dude.
I don't want physical power. No, I don't.
You want to be like
that
me? You want to just run fast and hide?
No, I don't want that.
Bite?
Spiritual, I'd put in with emotional too, because even if you're not spiritual or religious, you can be like vulnerable emotionally.
Okay, so we can add 4. We can do 4 powers.
Okay.
So spiritual, emotional, or spiritual, monetary, political, and physical.
Okay,
So what?
yeah.
So what about physical?
I don't care to have that
You wouldn't
one,
want
no.
physical power.
No, I don't think so. I think that would be the least, the one I would want least.
So it's interesting because physical power is really a in many ways a prelude to, a precursor to, and sort of the first kind of real power. In early settled life, good farmers, strong warriors.
Even in chimpanzee troops, right? The strongest alpha,
Well, in
large.
Sumeria, for instance, right? Like the Epic of Gilgamesh is based on a Lugal. A Lugal is a big man, right? And people who had success, big men who had success in battle or earned prestige in the battle, were thought of as possessing some sort of innate knowledge when it came to, or innate ability to lead, and so they were given political power. And I think this is kind of common, right? We see this with Donald Trump in business, even though he was a horrible businessman. He's a brilliant, powerful marketer. And so people say, well, he must really be, maybe he's good at politics, right?
Yeah.
Or Woodrow Wilson, he was a really smart guy, college president. Maybe he must be really good at governing.
We've talked
right?
about this before,
Like
right?
the halo
about how
effect of power.
to in large extent, the American president has almost always been the taller,
We talked
larger,
about that
right?
before, yeah.
And likewise, the alpha gorilla or chimpanzee or leopard seal, whoever it is that sort of
Only American
garners the concubine.
only
is
commander in
typically
chief
larger.
to actually lead his troops into battle.
George Washington.
No.
Who
Well, I
was that?
mean, as commander in chief, he did, but not as president. Only
Oh, yeah,
president to acting as commander in chief lead his troops into battle.
Who was that?
James Madison.
James Madison.
Jemmy.
He was a
Little
pretty big guy,
Jemmy.
wasn't he? No,
Oh,
he was-
yeah. All of 5
He
foot
was
1,
he was pretty
baby.
small, but generally speaking, I mean, American presidents have been pretty large, right?
Yeah, generally speaking. And I mean, it was less important, I think, obviously. In the
Now, look, I'll admit, ladies and gentlemen, when Nelson asked me which one I think is most important, which one I would most or least like to have powerful stature, it's easy for me to say because I have it, right? I have the privilege of saying that, right? I'm 6'4", almost 300 pounds, give or take 10 pounds. And I'm really big and strong and powerful and menacing. And so it's easy for me to say, nah, I'd give that up. Because, I do take my size for granted.
right. So, but
What would I
I'll be
like to
honest,
have?
I
I'd like
wouldn't
to have that
either.
emotional power, that psychological power.
Spiritual power.
I don't know if you call it spiritual, but certainly I want to be able to relate to people on a non-physical basis. I don't want to intimidate people. I don't want to make them fear me. I want to make them respect me. I want to make them look at me and go, he's a guy that I can work with. I want them to think leader. I want them to be influenced
So
by
how
me
do you
because they
think-
see something in me that they see in themselves.
How do you think our listeners could attain spiritual power?
I think opening themselves up, trying to be a better listener, in practicing empathy, also remaining authentic, giving others an opportunity to speak, encouraging others to speak out, creating conditions. If you're in a workplace and you have power over someone, creating conditions where people feel heard, right? I would hate to be the president of an institution or the CEO of a company and be so worried about keeping my power that I try to squash all attention, try to squash all negative stories, all gossip. Instead, I'd be working on building sort of a community, an alliance among my people where, it's obvious that we all share the same interests. We're free to speak. We're free to talk to one another honestly and openly. And criticism and dissent is not only acceptable, but it's actually obliged. That I want people.
I think the type of power you're talking about sort of goes across all aspects of
Yeah,
power.
right. Even
That
kids
is
want
to
that, right?
say-
Kids don't want to be
no,
fearful of their parent. Kids want to respect their parent.
Well, I mean, I don't care if you're in business, politics, or if you're in sport, right? I mean, we've all worked for, we've all had leaders who are just, everybody's got the
Do
title.
as I say, not as I do.
Well, like, just think of presidents, right?
Yeah.
They all get the same exact power from the Constitution, right?
Sure.
There's no difference.
It's
right?
given to them.
It's given to them, right? But the reason the president's popularity is measured and documented is because that matters. We're really sovereign. The people are sovereign.
People actually have the power, don't they?
Yeah, like if I was in Abraham Lincoln's cabinet, friend or foe beforehand, like he brought people to him and they would run through a wall.
And man,
for Lincoln. Not because he asked.
What better contrast or juxtaposition than Lincoln, the way he acquired power, kept power, versus, say, a Donald Trump, the way he acquired power and attempted to keep power, right? Both of which you can't think about, you can't discuss without thinking about the power of the people. Look, I think one of the most beautiful things about our democracy, or our style of democracy even, is that we have these sort of checks built into our system, specifically free speech, right? The media, which kind of goes hand in hand with free speech, some argue is the fourth rail of politics, that sort of guard, if you will, that kind of helps keep all of it egalitarian and equitable and smooth and honest. And finally, Nelson, gossip.
Gossip.
Yeah, I'm going to argue that gossip, rumors,
is a form of power.
Is a form of keeping power in check, holding people honest and accountable, right?
What do you mean?
Well, there's a prize-winning writer from like the early 90s who went out and did an ethnographic, biographical tour of 40 cultures that are hunter-gatherer on the earth, which was all the cultures that were left that were hunter-gatherer.
Gotcha.
And I went out and started interviewing them, observing them, and found that, to a culture, they all sort of agreed that sharing power, sharing status, sharing was most important. Cooperation is something they all preferred and they believed they benefited from. However, there were people that were given a little bit higher status, given a little bit stronger leadership roles. But those people that were given that had to earn it.
Gotcha.
It was given to them by others. And those people had to keep the masses happy. And if they didn't keep the masses happy, the masses took the power back from them. So they, like a button, they could turn the dial up and give them more or less power.
Cool.
And you think about it this way, isn't that kind of what the media, isn't that kind of what American constituency is about?
Yeah, absolutely.
Donald Trump on January 6th, was trying to take that ability
away.
to turn the dial up and down, right?
That's right.
Away, because maybe he sees it easier, or he's more attracted to asymmetrical democracy,
right?
If that's even a thing.
No, it's not. It's not.
Right? But my point is about the indigenous hunter-gatherer tribes. What they found was one of the things that these tribes do in order to keep the ones given power in check is they use shame, gossip, often, freely, and effectively.
That's
right?
funny.
They gossip behind each other's back. So if some person has power and they're acting in their own self-interest too much, they're getting a little too Machiavellian, the rumors start to flow.
Well, in a small society, that's really effective. But you also see it in societies like in Rome when somebody became unpopular. It's why you always have to take some of the behaviors you hear about the emperors with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Because the first thing the Romans would do was attack their sexual behavior, their deviant nature.
Oh, yeah.
And so, that was, a big city can be a small town. Now, it wasn't nearly as effective, obviously. But I could see that very easily in a small setting with, I could definitely see that. I was talking about monetary power.
Okay.
Would you like it?
Yes. I would love to have the kind of
that?
power Jeff Bezos or Zuckerberg have.
You'd like that?
There's very few people that have ever lived this earth that have more monetary power.
Do you think that's the ultimate power in American society?
It probably is, or at least we're born and we're
Do you think
reinforced
it's greater
to
than
believe
political
it is.
power?
I don't know, but I would just simply say this. Jeff Bezos, Donald Trump, Zuckerberg, anyone who's a billionaire, ever been a billionaire.
Trump's not that rich.
Has uncanny ability to influence others. Wouldn't you say? Man, Zuckerberg, what does he do with his time? He doesn't try to do good with his time. I mean, he's in the gym now, by the way, a couple of hours a day, I understand. He's been doing it for years, trying to learn Brazilian jiu-jitsu. He's a small guy, small stature. He's got billions and millions of dollars, arguably one of the richest, potentially most influential people on the earth. And what does he do with a lot of his spare time? Try to become better at arm-barring people and choking people out. He wants to literally be thought of. He wants to be thought of as physically menacing, right? He wants to be scary and intimidating physically. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I could be Gumby. I could literally be a night crawler, a gooey Gumby. I could be, in stature, short, spineless goo. But if I had $1 billion, man, can you imagine the good you could do?
Well, look, we talked about when we
I want the money. I want the money more than anything because I want to be able to help more people, influence more people.
We had an episode on the good life, right?
Yeah.
And we talked about money, and we talked about a set number that you really need in order to be happy. And there's not a lot of
and talked about
for
giving
your
money
buck.
away, didn't we, as well? How it makes you feel good.
Right.
How selfishly it actually raises your dopamine levels and makes you feel better when you give others money.
Yeah, Amanda and I talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
Like if I had that monetary power, what I would share. And why
I want to be a part of it, by the way. I want to be a part
more?
of it. I want to get on the cruise with you. Don't get me wrong. I'm selfish in how I want to share with others. Like when I think about spending money,
I don't want to just
buy the cruise ship and be by myself. I don't want to buy the island and just hang out on the island and read and watch, the sunset. I want to take people with me.
Yeah. Yeah, I would too. So, I mean.
What about you? Money?
Yeah, I would
what do you
love
think about money?
I would love to attain monetary power.
So if you were a billionaire, what was your first act? What's your first order of business, man?
If I was a billionaire?
Yeah.
Man.
And we're talking like you're going to get perpetually $1 billion a year. It's like you don't just have 1 billion, man. Every year you're 2 billion, 3 billion.
I don't think there's anything that I would put past myself in terms of just like having so much fun.
Would you try to be? Would you try to be Batman? Would you try literally?
Yeah,
would you,
absolutely.
At that level,
I would just try to go
micromanaging the good within the community.
No, I would just like literally walk into any random restaurant.
No, you'd be
every
Shaquille
day,
O'Neal.
and I'd be
You'd
like,
be Shaquille.
I'm buying everybody's food today.
Yeah, you'd be the Oprah Winfrey or the Shaquille O'Neal.
Yeah,
right?
I would randomly.
You get a car.
Like,
you get a car.
If I had $1 billion a year, I would randomly go pick out, let's say, 10 people every year, right? And
That'd be cool.
And give that 10 poor people, people who live on the street,
Sure.
and give them $10 million, help them manage $10 million, help them buy a house with it, go to a financial planner.
Yeah.
And I would just, every year I'd take 10 and do that.
First thing I would
That'd
do is
be
I would
down to
buy
900
our
million.
hospital back here in Wilmington, North Carolina, right? Novant, you'd be out. I'd buy our hospital back, give it back to the people, man.
Free medical care.
Free medical care or really reduced medical care, sliding scale medical care for everyone.
That'd be fun,
Yeah,
but
it'd be
it really
real
makes
fun.
you, but again, doesn't that kind of make you realize how limited even $1 billion or $2 billion a year
the
is?
capacity to do good, doesn't that also give you an amazing sense of responsibility? Look, there's certainly people that don't want power, and you might think of it as, oh my God, why wouldn't you want it? You don't dream of power, but I bet you there are plenty of people who don't really want much of it because people do have your the attention's on you now. You're in the spotlight, and there's such an awesome sense of responsibility you must feel when you have any kind of power.
I think in order to want power, and I think you mentioned this with regards to men and women. In my experience, men want to run for office, and we'll get into political power in a minute.
Okay.
But men want power in order to be somebody. In order to leave a legacy.
Maybe they want that
and
status.
mean somebody.
Right.
Women typically run for office, in my experience,
Yep.
for an issue.
Okay.
A specific issue, a specific cause, something that has driven them, but their desire to, be somebody, to me, and I could misread
It's less.
it doesn't seem to be the same driving force.
Yeah, it seems like it's almost more about social connection. I think Shelley Taylor and others.
Has there ever been any studies on gender
Shelley
and
Taylor.
involvement?
Look up Shelley Taylor and her research on men versus women and how they experience or acquire or sort of rule or use power. Absolutely. Shelley Taylor's the one, if you remember a few podcasts ago, we were talking about this notion of fight or flight. And I said Shelley Taylor was the one of the first to point out that that's not necessarily universal among the genders. She has found in many, many contexts that men typically use the fight or flight response when they're stressed, when they're in an emergency situation, when they're up against a threat. Women use a slightly different strategy she refers to as tend and befriend.
Tend and befriend.
So
like
keep
that.
your enemies close, or keep your what? Friends close,
Your
enemies
enemies
closer
close.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
So someone's trying to compromise your trust or manipulate you or even physically threaten you. The female tendency might be to pull them closer, try to befriend them, be diplomatic.
Well, the
which is interesting.
one thing I'm going to say, the last thing I'll say about monetary power, right, is, to me, it is the most impactful power that we
Potentially
have
100%.
in the United. And
I
the
think
reason
so.
I'm going to say that is this: I don't really possess much physical power, right?
So that's
compared to
out,
others.
right?
No, but
no
here's
amount
the
of
thing.
steroids on the
But wait a
earth is going to
minute.
give you that kind of power.
No, but here's the thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
We both live under the social contract, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Well, all of us live under it,
we
whether or not
don't-
we take it seriously or not is another thing.
Right, but most of us take it seriously enough to allow we the little people,
The little peons.
to survive, right?
Yeah.
I know that because you value the contract, and most people do, you're not going to beat me up for my lunch money.
Yeah, I'm not going to do anything to
speak, right?
undermine
Yeah.
that contract.
Right. So, okay, so let's put that over there, right? I still can operate effectively in the society
Right,
without
right, right.
strength.
Oh, by the way, that reminds me of a president or something that said something about a stick and use it. What was that?
Walk softly and carry a big stick.
There you go, which is kind of oxymoronic almost. Why do you have to walk softly and carry a big stick? All right, if you walk softly and you're careful, you don't need a stick.
No, because you're carrying the big stick.
It allows you to walk softly.
It allows you to walk softly.
And again, that's
right?
kind of Machiavellian. Though.
That's you. That's you.
No, I don't even need the big stick. I just walk softly.
Oh yeah, you're big soft walker right here.
I'm a really big soft walker.
So
I'm Sasquatch in like gel shoes.
So with political power,
Mm-hmm.
most of us don't have it. Most of us will never really attain it. Yet collectively, we the people
Have it.
are sovereign in a democracy. This is very true in a democracy. In a dictatorship, if you don't have power, I think.
And what's the first thing
I think
a
it's little different.
proto-fascist or would-be a dictator is going to do? They're going to try to undermine that by trying to cut us off from one another, aren't they?
Sure.
They're going to shut down the media. They're going to enforce anti-free speech legislation or rules. They're going to do all those things that kind of undermine what I said earlier about keeping power in check, free speech, the media, and gossip.
Right.
They hate stuff on the bathroom walls, don't they? I mean, you've got a real insecure person, right, that's concerned about what's written on the bathroom wall. Where did you hear that rumor?
Well,
Where did you get that? Trying to squash gossip and dissent.
Authoritarianism is a fortress, right?
Yeah.
And no crack, however small,
Can be
accounted
because water
small.
will find its way
Exactly.
through any crack.
So then you have spiritual power. If I don't have
that's Arab
spiritual
Spring
power,
stuff right there, baby.
if I don't have emotional or spiritual power, I'm probably none the wiser, right?
Yeah.
So it's not going to bother me if I don't know what I'm missing, so to speak.
So let's do another one.
And then let's talk, so now let's get to political power.
Political power. See, I think
Right.
political power is
the
about
political season,
communicating,
baby.
right? Your rhetoric, communicating, spreading a message.
I think that's how it's attained. But I want to be clear.
What do you
It's
mean
neither
when you think of
it's
political
neither
power? Right?
attained nor and I'm speaking now, and we'll get to other democracies or other systems of government in a minute. But in American democracy, political power is neither attained nor given. It's mutual,
Yeah, okay.
right? It's
How
mutual.
so?
Well, because I can be a great orator, and I know you're going to say, Nelson, you already are a great orator.
We're not talking.
Well, I appreciate
we're not talking. Yeah, we're not talking hypothetically here.
I love rhetoric. I love words. I have the best words.
Yeah, best words. Yeah.
But
Some say you have the best words. Right?
say I have the
Everybody's
best
saying
words.
it.
But regardless of my political ability, my rhetorical ability, I have to win support from people who are willing to give it. I have to convince others. And is it my convincing or their giving? And I feel like the genius...
It's a dance.
The
is what you're
genius...
saying.
It is a dance. And the genius of democracy, right, is that because it's a dance, because it is at least partially given, I feel like for the best among us, for the people, the wise people that we hope seek office, that should be incredibly humbling. To have the opportunity to have somebody... I remember the night I was elected to local office and having that feeling of, wow, all of these people have said, all right, here's my power.
What, 25,
I'm giving it to you.
40,000 people?
It was like 42, but all those people said, this is my power. I am giving it to you. I'm trusting you.
Dude, if I get 100 listeners on this
power.
podcast on one episode in the first week, I mean, I feel like freaking a king.
Yeah,
I
but
can't imagine what 42,000
honestly,
upvotes would feel
I'm
like.
being very honest. It didn't feel, you feel pleased and honored, but there's a real sense, I think, if you're doing it for the right reasons of, wow, people have trusted me with,
Awesome
with all
responsibility
of their
comes with that.
stuff, all of their power. And you always try to keep that in mind. Now, that's the best of us. I think that happens with presidents like Abraham Lincoln,
Absolutely.
Theodore Roosevelt, maybe, Franklin Roosevelt, maybe, George W. Bush, I think, had some of that. I think that happens with most of our presidents. I don't think it's happened with all of them.
No, certainly not one of our last presidents who, it seemed again on January 6th, was willing and very almost capable of undermining that, right?
Yeah.
So as to kind of move towards more asymmetric style of government.
Yeah, and so I think that's why democracy is very frustrating. But if you look at those other systems, authoritarianism, you look at power in dictatorships, and it is very, very different. It's fear-based, but the fear goes both ways.
Yeah, and pretty fragile, I would say. Pretty fragile.
Very fragile. Like I said, no crack.
How many heads of companies or institutions stay in power, and for how long, if they're using a purely iron fist Machiavellian style, right? If they're so fragile as to get rid of all dissent and gossip, it can be.
They can be very effective.
It can be 100%. But look, like Yelp can take potentially the best, most powerful sort of restaurant or business and sink it, because you give the power to the people to gossip and to sort of point out those cracks and start sort of opening those cracks up a little bit. And before you know it, that company falls apart, right? Reputations matter. And again, I think that's why the community having an outlet like the media is so important.
I just read a quote this morning that said, reputation is what other people think of you, characters, what you think of yourself.
Oh, nice.
Reputation doesn't really matter, but in terms of power, it matters a great deal, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, Pol Pot, you mentioned.
They knew this.
Benito Mussolini.
They knew this very well.
They inspired fear.
Mm-hmm.
They controlled everything. Squashed dissent.
Mm-hmm.
And they themselves, came to power from a place of absolute fear.
Yeah.
They were terrified of their people.
Yeah. Now, look, we don't have time on this episode, but I mean, I think you would agree that lately we've seen dramatic changes in how we can inspire others, large groups of people. Even average people can do this with things like the internet, right? Twitter in particular, now X or Facebook.
I was actually going to mention the new
politicians,
wave of power.
Yeah, the influencer.
These influencers,
age.
man.
Isn't it something like an average person, someone with no stature, someone with no spiritual power, someone with no psychological power, can rise to power just simply by having 50, 60,000 eyeballs on them,
but Jason,
and can start inspiring change, can't they?
But people who...
And politicians can do it now quicker and easier than ever.
People who have that power and don't realize they have power are like fools walking around with a loaded gun.
And people who have that power and recognize it.
Did you just read the indictment from the Justice Department?
Yeah. I know what you're going to say.
Yes, there's a company in Tennessee who was paid by Russian state television to give $10 million to influencers in the United States to promote Russian propaganda.
Yep.
And these influencers had no idea.
Nor did they care, probably.
But they didn't know. The company knew because they wrote things like, are we billing Moscow for this?
Well, look, that's why we don't have to worry at all on this show. Right,
we only got,
about being a
stooge.
A stooge. We don't take any money to begin with, and we don't have hardly any followers. So to worry about our followers being bots, it's not something we're concerned ourselves with. When you only have like 160 followers, hint, hint, ladies and gentlemen, go ahead and like and follow and share our content. We work hard for you.
But I do think you bring up a good point, which, and going back to some versions of power that I think you and I have, and that's the power of information,
the voice,
absolutely. Right? Communication.
Yeah. We have it right here on this podcast, right? The most people I've ever reached in a classroom is about 175.
Right.
The most I've ever reached, like at a symposium, might be 200-300, a public forum or symposium.
Right.
And again, that's awesome, and that's an incredible opportunity and responsibility, and I don't take it lightly, never would, never have. But I recognize that on this podcast, Nelson, we are reaching people in over 60 countries, and every state in the United States, including Puerto Rico, Guam, D.C., the only place we don't seem to be able to reach, ladies and gentlemen, Wyoming. I don't understand it. I don't
We'll
know why
get there.
Dick Cheney
We'll get there.
and his relatives don't at least tune
We'll get
in once
there.
or twice. We don't.
We're trying to
We're
book
not too
Liz
critical of
as
Cheney.
a guest.
Right?
We're trying to book Liz as a
Yeah.
guest. The Cheney family, you have an open
Anybody in
invitation
Wyoming,
to come
man,
in
you
here.
can be the first person in the state in the history of this podcast, 15 months going strong. Yeah. To listen to, and you only need to listen for like 20 minutes, and we'll get credit for a listen.
Look, I might be a little naive. I am on an election kick, so I'm gonna give you something of a final thought here.
Mm-hmm.
But every single one of us, whether it's 5 people, 10 people, 1 person, every single one of us has the ability to influence somebody else. And when we go to the polls in November and we make our statement as a collective people,
gotta keep that in
we
mind.
all have power. And with power comes great responsibility.
Ooh, I like that.
Every single
Heard
one
that
of us.
before somewhere.
Every single one of us has the power to shape the outcome of the election in the state of North Carolina, in the country. We all have that power, and we have to use it. We have a tremendous, humbling responsibility to do so.
And we can give that
So
power
every one of my
to a strong man, can't we? We can give that
We can give
power
it to
to
whoever we
a
want.
spiritualist. We can give that power to someone who's emotionally mature and socially caring. We can give that power to just a politician. We do have that opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, with the power comes that responsibility. So I want people listening to our show to, I'm sure they already do because our listeners are highly educated, highly motivated. I'm sure we pull from a very educated demographic.
And Nelson, I think you teed us up perfectly for next week's episode, which is going to take a look at voting, specifically what we call inherited voting.
Yes.
Yeah,
I can't
inherit
wait for
the
that.
vote, right?
Yes.
Is it
inherit the
something that's
vote.
born in us, or is it shaped, and or to what extent might it be shaped throughout our lifetime? Why do we vote for who we vote for, when, and under what circumstances?
Yeah, and we might also be looking at a special episode on Thursday, and might do a back-to-back because we have the presidential debate coming up
That's right.
on September 10th. And so maybe do a little, put the debate on the couch.
Yeah.
How weird. What a stupid way to pick a president.
Hey, I know, but it's still the best way known to man, I think.
I don't know. It's just kind of a lot of fun to watch.
Nelson, it's been a pleasure, man.
As
And
always.
Until next week, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and share our content, please. And hey, if you got an extra second while you're in Spotify and or Apple Podcast, hit that rate and hit review and type something positive, negative, or otherwise. We'd love to hear it. Take care.
Piff continued. Those arbitrarily assigned the role of low dog became more nearly man's best friend.
If I take someone who's rich and make them feel psychologically a little less well off, they become way more generous, way more charitable, way more likely to offer help to another person.
So when people are playing this Monopoly game and they're in the poor person role that you're playing, they, if they were rich in real life, become more understanding, more compassionate?
Not just in this game of Monopoly, but in a whole bunch of other experiments that we've run where we make rich people feel poor or poor people feel rich. You find the same kinds of differences.
Differences that could conceivably help people understand their subconscious biases and perhaps even moderate the costly effects of economic inequality. But until that happens, we'd suggest you look both ways before crossing.